earlier video, we discussed the Varna system which was prevalent in the Vedic period of India. We saw how the Varna system was flexible and fluid, and that it was not based on the birth but based on occupation or vocation. Varna was more of a social stratification system than a caste system determined by birth. Jati, meaning birth, is mentioned much less often in ancient texts, but it is clearly distinguished from Varna. There are 4 Varnas but thousands of Jatis. The Jatis are complex social groups that lack universally applicable definitions or characteristics and have been more flexible and diverse than was previously often assumed. The caste system based on birth as it exists in modern India was created by the British colonialists.
The term caste is not originally an Indian word, though it is now widely used both in English and in Indian languages. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, it is derived from the Portuguese casta, meaning race, lineage, breed, and originally pure or unmixed. Varna does not translate as caste. The Vedic texts neither mention the concept of untouchable people nor any practice of untouchability. The rituals in the Vedas ask the noble or the king to eat with the commoner from the same vessel.
In 1881 census and thereafter, colonial ethnographers used caste headings to count and classify the people in what was then the British India. The colonial era census caste tables ranked, standardized, and cross-referenced Jati listings for Indians on principles similar to zoology and botanical classifications, aiming to establish who was superior to whom under their supposed purity, occupational origins, and collective moral worth. The British Orientalists and colonialists divided the society of India similar to the zoological classification of animals. This ideological scheme was theoretically comprising of around 3,000 castes, which in turn was claimed to be composed of 90,000 local endogamous subgroups.
The British, coming from a society rigidly divided by class, attempted to equate India's castes with British social classes. British society's own similarly rigid class system provided the British with a template for understanding Indian society and castes. Robert Caldwell, a zealous missionary appointed by the London Missionary Society, started studying the Tamil language to separate them from Hinduism, and this was the first attempt to create the Aryan-Dravidian dichotomy. He ascribed the Brahmins a distinct racial identity and imagined that India had a history of race wars. Caldwell averred that Brahmins were of the Aryan racial stock. They had moved southwards as colonists and instructors, once the Dravidians were militarily defeated by the Aryans. This led to the rise of the Aryan-Dravidian divide. This theory was later supported by none other than Friedrich Max Müller. By the early 19th century, a new type of knowledge called the racial science had evolved in Europe. Colonial administrator Herbert Hope Risley, an exponent of racial science, used the ratio of the width of a nose to its height to divide Indians into Aryan and Dravidian races as well as 7 castes.
Between 1860 and 1920, the British formulated the caste system into their system of governance, granting administrative jobs and senior appointments only to the upper caste. The British government now introduced a series of unjust acts to further create a social divide. The British colonial government enacted the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. This law declared that all those who belonged to certain castes were born with criminal tendencies. The criminal by birth castes under this act included initially the Ahirs, the Gurjars, and the Jats, but its enforcement expanded by the late 19th century to include most Shudras and untouchables, such as Chamars, as well as Sannyasis and hill tribes.
Castes suspected of rebelling against colonial laws and seeking self-rule for India, such as the previous ruling families Kallars and the Marwars in South India, and non-loyal castes in North India such as the Ahirs, Gurjars, and Jats, were called predatory and barbarian and added to the criminal castes list. Some caste groups were targeted using the Criminal Tribes Act even when there were no reports of any violence or criminal activity. but where their forefathers were known to have rebelled against Mughal or British authorities, or these castes were demanding labor rights and disrupting colonial tax collecting authorities.
The colonial government prepared a list of criminal castes, and all members registered in these castes by caste census and were restricted in terms of regions that they could visit, move about in, or people with whom they could socialize. The vestiges of this regional divide can still be seen in the Konkan area of Maharashtra, where there are different vastis like Brahman Vasti, Mahar Vasti, Mang Vasti, Muslim Vasti, etc. In certain regions of colonial India, entire caste groups were presumed guilty by birth, arrested, children separated from their parents, and held in penal colonies or sometimes quarantined without conviction or due process. By 1931, the colonial government included 237 criminal castes and tribes under the Act in the Madras Presidency alone.
The colonial government then passed another law called the Land Alienation Act in 1900 and Punjab Preemption Act in 1930, listing castes that could legally own land and denying equivalent property rights to other census-determined castes. These acts prohibited the intergenerational and intragenerational transfer of land from land-owning castes to any non-agricultural castes, thereby preventing economic mobility of property and created consequent caste barriers in India.
Indian caste system, as we know today, is a modern phenomenon, and the caste was fundamentally transformed by the British colonial rule. According to Nicholas Dirks, before, the colonial rule caste affiliation was quite loose and fluid, but colonial rule enforced the caste affiliation rigorously and constructed a more strict hierarchy than existed previously, with some castes being criminalized and others being given preferential treatment.
The great Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, born in 1891 after the creation of the British caste system, was also a victim of caste discrimination and caste oppression which were created by the British colonialists. Now you might wonder why he burnt the Manusmriti. The simple reason for this is that Dr. Ambedkar had been referring to the abridged version of the Manusmriti which was translated into English by William Jones entitled Manava Dharma Shastra, or the Institutes of Manu, in 1794.
William Jones believed that Christianity was the only true religion, and he had a strong evangelical bias, and he was trying to find the references in the Indic scriptures that would verify the biblical narrative, so that these scriptures could be used to bulwark Christianity and convert the Hindus into Christians. This biased translation of Manusmriti was used by the later Orientalists to create a racial divide into the Indian society which was not present in the pre-colonial and the pre-Mongol era of India.
As a point of fact, the text called Manusmriti isn't even included in the primary 18 Smritis of Vedic literature, and it was a much later addition done by sage Yajnavalkya. His treatise called the Yajnavalkya Smriti mentions two schools of law, namely Mitakshara and Dayabhaga, which are still used as the foundation for the Hindu Succession Act, Hindu Marriage Act, etc. in India's constitution.
However, today we are taught that Vedic India was caste oppressive and that the Shudras were simply slaves who were declared as low-borns. But the reality is different. So before arriving at any rash conclusions, let us learn the spirit of the Vedic law of Varnas and the discriminatory and the unjust caste system created by the British colonialists. After all, even Bhagavad Gita asserts more importance to gunas and your karma than your birth. This brings me to quote Abraham Lincoln's famous phrase, "All men are created equal." But we can rephrase this quote as per Vedic law that all humans are created equal, but it is your actions that define who you are. So stay tuned, stay educated, and last but not the least, know your culture by self-investigating the truth. Shubhaste Panthanah Santu. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.